want to go to the beach and they want to go and do things and travel, I mean, that has been a major industry that's been impacted for us. It's just all the summer travel that is just not happening. People are just staying local. So
exactly. No, yeah, they have to, but I'm glad that Virginia is looking good from that perspective, and hopefully it goes and stays under control there. Well done. So today I wanted to well, obviously hear about your story. Well, I'll start by asking you about how you got into the world of data in the first place, and then I'm keen to move forward to the type of work that you're doing at the moment, what you're doing for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we can take it from there. How does that sound?
yeah, perfect, man. Perfect. It's love to just have a conversation.
Oh, same, man, same. So how did you get started? What was it about the world of data that pulled you in? I saw some early interest in GIS.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
So none of it was intentional. It was all
I love
serendipitous.
it.
I blame the universe completely and fully for everything that's happened in my life, because I have not had anything to do with the planning. This is not. So I originally started when I went to college. I originally was going to be a civil engineer because that was the business that my dad was in, and I was going to help him, level up his business and kind of do that whole thing. And slowly I kind of gravitated more into environmental engineering because I felt more of an environmental focus, and I really wanted to have an impact. And especially at the time, it was the late 80s, early 90s. I felt, for me personally, especially being in Miami, it was quite a bit of environmental impact with our local marine ecology. And so I felt environmental engineering was going to be a really good place for me.
Yes.
So I had a professor who was a mentor, friend of mine, and I have to give him props for this, because I was at a quandary, right? I was at a fork in the road where I really loved the science and I really enjoyed the basic science that I was doing. And the engineering was appealing, especially from a financial standpoint, because for an engineer, obviously there's a lot more potential income there than just normal everyday science, is what we know as just being basic scientific research. And so I asked him, hey, what do you think I should do, right? Because I want to do something in the environment, and I'm not sure if I should do environmental engineering or ecology, right? And he was like, look, I'm not going to tell you what you should pick, but pick the one that you would do for the rest of your life for free, and that's the one that you should really consider.
That's great advice.
It is absolutely sage advice. And take money out of the equation and just simply focus on what brings you fulfillment and happiness. And at that moment, I said, you know what, ecology is really appeals to me right now, and this is what I want to do. So I went down that path, and I was focusing on marine ecology and large marine ecosystems ecology. And so while I was doing my undergrad, I was actually working at the University of Miami at their graduate school for marine and atmospheric science, working on coral reefs and seagrass beds and doing studies out there and collecting data, right? And just really started getting into that aspect of science, and going out collecting data, analyzing the data, coming up with hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, doing variety of statistical methodologies to figure out if what you're thinking is actually legit, is what's happening out in the real world, and all that wonderful stuff. And eventually worked my way into a full-time job at the University of Miami upon graduating from undergrad. And they sat me down and said, well, you've got a job here if you can figure out this GIS thing. And so they sat me out in front of this Unix machine.
That's a good incentive.
And like 4 feet worth of manuals, right? Back then it was ArcInfo 6. And they said, we've got this massive project in Tampa Bay that we're doing a bunch of ecological modeling for. We're doing freight and transport modeling. We're doing hydrodynamic modeling. And we need an environment to tie it all in together. And this GIS thing seems to be the right thing, but nobody else here knows how to operate it. Figure it out. I was like, sink or swim, right? Sink or swim.
Yeah.
And so that to me was my first data integration project, and model integration and statistical model integration. And so as a result of that, it really became clear to me that I just loved working with data and being able to tell stories from those data assets that I was working with. And so that's what started this whole journey.
Man, that's amazing. That is amazing. And when was that? When did you do that first integration project?
So that was back in 95.
Yeah.
And so I worked on that project from 95 to about 97. And so throughout those 2 years, we were just heavily working on building out those models, doing all the analyses, collecting all the data in, we had microcosms that we were collecting data, and we were collecting data in the ecosystem. We were just doing a whole bunch of things, tying a bunch of things together to come up with, how is this ecosystem going to react if this were to happen or that were to happen, and that kind of stuff. And so that was fantastic. And then I ended up at the University of Miami running my own GIS lab. And so that was very exciting. And I got to do a wide variety of different projects across the broad spectrum of all kinds of things spatial, from, a harmful algal bloom project to how that harmful algal blooms correlate with liver and colon cancer. And I mean, just broad spectrum of stuff, working with all kinds of different people. But I think one of the basic things that I really enjoyed about those projects was being of service, right? Because I wasn't really doing things in GIS for GIS sake, right? It wasn't just geographic information science that I was working on. It was really at the service of something larger than that, of something that had potential impact in our social sphere. And so that to me was extraordinarily appealing. And I think that was a big driver for a lot of the impact that these projects had on my career.
And I love that focus, that the tools are just a stepping stone, and that the outcome that you're seeking is a real world impact. Having that from earlier in your career, I mean, kudos. That's amazing. And so tell us, how did you end up being the chief data officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia?
All right, so that's somewhat of a long-winded story, but I'll go through it anyway. So after I was at the University of Miami for a few years, there was an opportunity to work at NOAA Fisheries and be their GIS and spatial scientist, if you will. And so I went there, and I was there for about 15 years, and I worked on a variety of different projects, initially at a local scale, doing a lot of satellite data integration, so data assets that were being collected by satellites. So let's talk about remote sensing, right? I mean, it's not just remote sensing of visual imagery of a location, but we were out there tagging animals, highly migratory species that were traveling the world, that were beaming up their data into a satellite, and then they would beam it down to a receiving station, and I would write all the applications to bring it in, integrate it, and then visualize it and generate insights. So that was pretty cool.
And this is in the 2000s, right?
This was 99, no, 2001. This is 2001.
Bad.
Yeah, 2001.
Like early days. Yeah, that's
amazing. Way early. I mean, and this is like, I mean, as you know, right? It's like none of these things were developed, right? There was no APIs, no infrastructure. You just had to hard code it all yourself, figure it out, no recipe, which is, I think, the story of my career, right? There's no recipe for anything. You're always on the edge, doing something crazy that nobody else has done, and you just got to figure it out. Great. Like, I love it. I think, I couldn't ask for anything better. I think if I had to follow a recipe, I'd be bored out of my mind and wouldn't want to do it, So early 2000s, yeah, that was the first project that I did for NOAA Fisheries. And since then we evolved on a variety of different things and started working more enterprise scale, right? Looking at more at and I worked for the Southeast region. So we were headquartered in Miami, but we had, 4 labs across from North Carolina all the way to Texas. So I started to look more like regional scope and how do we integrate our data? I mean, everyone was collecting different pieces of the puzzle. So how do we integrate those data assets to get a much larger view of what's happening out in the real world so we can manage these species better, right? And so going through all those processes, and you realize technology is never the issue, right? Yeah. It's always people. People are always the issue. So you really got to work with people and try to build up those relationships. And those are the things that I learned over those years of being in NOAA Fisheries. Now, fast forward 15 years later, I then get an opportunity to work in DC for the Federal Transit Administration at the US Department of Transportation. And so as a result of all of my enterprise experience working on NOAA's Big Data Project and working on a variety of national initiatives for NOAA Fisheries and working with other folks across NOAA. And NOAA, for those who don't know, NOAA is our National Atmospheric and National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration. We have 6 different services. So there's the Fisheries Service, the Ocean Service, Satellite Service, Weather Service, and a couple other ancillary services as well. but really it's, everyone has a different piece of the pie, and it's being able to look across the different services, which in their own right, they're like agencies of their own, right? And don't really work with each other, but being in environments where you can work across multiple agencies with other scientists and bring data assets together to work on larger scale problems really kind of demonstrates the value of the synergy of data integration and bringing your data assets together and making collective, holistic views of what's happening in the real world. Because at the end of the day, data is just a binary representation of what's happening in the real world, right? And so being able to translate that back and be able to say, okay, this is what I think is happening in the real world. How do I verify that this is my perspective is valid, right? And so you have to integrate data from other places. So having that enterprise perspective really set me up to be the chief enterprise architect and the chief data officer for the Federal Transit Administration. So in that scenario, I actually managed the data lifecycle from soup to nuts, right? All the way through. And so working with the development teams, we had 9 different development teams, and coming up with the data standards that they all have to follow, because they're all kind of working in the same, they were all working in the same environment with the same data source, building out their applications to support the business processes. But they were all kind of like, when I got there, it was like the Wild Wild West. They all did their own thing, and we'll figure it out when we get there. And then when you want, so the funny thing is, when I came on board, I was also the BI program manager. It was a small agency where we had to wear many hats. But anyway, the first thing is like, well, make sense of all these data assets and give us some insight, right? Tell us what's happening with all the grants that we're offering, with the operations of the organizations that we're managing, all this wonderful stuff. And so I start obviously looking at the data, and the first thing you find are data quality issues. Yeah. It's like, well, this is what you have, and this is what it looks like, and we need to fix it. Well, how can we fix it? Well, we implement these data standards, we implement a process, we do gatekeeper reviews. Before any developer, can implement any code on this system, they have to go through a variety of checkpoints to make sure that their data model is accurate to match the business process that they're modeling, and then, the DDL and all that wonderful stuff. And so that allowed me to kind of look at the entire thing holistically and say, all right, how do we fix this in a way that doesn't impede the developers from doing their work? Because we don't want to stop them. You don't want to hinder them. We want them to continue working, but we want them doing it in a consistent, standardized way that all development teams can adopt. And so that required quite a few months worth of work to put that process together. But at the end of the day, we were able to tie it all in to what I then created or called the data value chain, right? Where we start off with the bits and bytes, right? And the data assets, the data itself, the binary representation of what's happening in the real world. But then it doesn't become information until someone interprets it, right? It takes a human being from some perspective to interpret that data, those bits and bytes, to be able to say, okay, well, this is what this means to me. But the more eyes you have on, the more perspectives that you have, or the more domains that are looking at that data, they're going to have different interpretations, therefore creating more information, right? But that information doesn't become knowledge until it's assimilated into the organization, right? You have to understand the mechanisms, the patterns, and trends that are being represented in that binary data to be able to say, okay, well, this is what this means. This is how this is evolving. These are the mechanisms and patterns that are associated with this. But then ultimately, it doesn't become intelligence until that knowledge is integrated into the decision-making framework. Someone looks at it, gets the insight, makes a decision, but then ultimately takes an action. Right? If you don't take an action on your decision, then you've done nothing. Right? Yes. So you have to be able to facilitate that action. And so that's where I really got that whole entire piece nailed down, because I pretty much controlled the entire scope of that process, and I really kind of illuminated that. So after that, and I knew this was a long-winded story, so I apologize. But
this is great. This is great. Yeah.
That's how I ended up at the Commonwealth of Virginia as their chief data officer, because after having that entire experience, and I was able to control the full spectrum of the data lifecycle, I was then able to transfer over to state government and then be able to work with them on improving their data posture. And so that's where I am now.
Man, amazing. And I've got quite a few, obviously, follow-up questions. Super interested, but I'll say for the people that are tuning in, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section. I made it so you can upvote other people's questions, and then we can start taking the ones that get the most votes. We'll start with those. But man, a lot of things stood out to me in your background, and one of them was the strength. I think strength of yours to bring people together, and highlighted by how you approach the beginning of of projects and the beginning of capability development and the end of the project, where I find that a lot of people tend to focus in the middle section, which is kind of like the technical delivery. But you seem to also have a knack for, leveraging what other people, leveraging the data assets from other parts of the organization and being able to bring those people together for a common cause, do the technical delivery, and then highlight the importance or the value that this new work can create, and get people to adopt it, and really drive sort of that last mile of analytics adoption so people can actually get the value. Do you agree? Is this an area of focus for you, the start and end piece of bringing people together and getting people to use the new capabilities? And how has that been for you? Is it a focus? And how did you develop that strength?
So that's a great question. Yes, I absolutely agree with you that the end goal matters, because it all starts with why. Why are we doing this, right? And if you can let people understand the why behind the how and ultimately the what that's created, then you'll get a lot more buy-in. And those are the things that, I always focus on the why most importantly, because not only is it a driver for a lot of individuals to start to respond to what you're asking them to do, but it also gives meaning and value to the work that you're doing. Yes, we implement technologies and it's great, and we're innovative and we're creative in the processes that we generate, and that's all wonderful, but those are means to the end, and the end is the value that we're providing either our stakeholders or our constituents. I mean, I've been in public service now for 19 years. And even back when I was at the University of Miami, I still considered that somewhat of a public service, because I was still, at the service of the other scientists that I was working with. So it's about being of service and providing value to those around you. And so if you can start with that why and look at how what you're doing is actually providing that value to individuals way beyond yourself, I think that brings a lot of people on board faster than if you were just start with the basic, well, we're going to create this solution and this is, that's all. A lot of people don't really resonate. I mean, except for the techies. We love the technology. We want to be able to jump in. But the reality is, and I look at, people process technology, right, all the time. And technology is like this big, right?
Yeah.
Process is this big, people. Like,
yeah.
That's how much important it is, and that's where you need to focus. And so being able to, bring all of those different individuals, because you don't have the entire perspective. And if you come into the problem understanding that you have a perspective, but yours isn't the only one, nor is it the most important one, it's just a perspective. And when you bring other people into the mix, you're able to appreciate what their perspectives are, and then be able to bring together and create a more robust solution, because you now are not just one-sided. You're now looking at multiple points of view that are, integrated into the larger solution space.
Yeah. Oh man, that's fantastic. Yeah, no, really good. So I want to first I'm going to ask you about the differences between working in a university, working at a federal level, and then working at a state level. And then I want to hear about the types of initiatives that you're doing in Virginia. But first, if you could tell us a little bit about how do you see the different areas that you worked in? What are some commonalities and differences that you found?
Wow. So at the University of Miami, it was a very casual environment, but in many cases, from a research perspective, it was also a very competitive environment, right? You're in a publish or perish environment, so data sharing isn't exactly like the easiest thing to do, especially when scientists are very focused on trying to get a research paper out or a publication out that is reliant upon a particular set of data that they've been working on for maybe 2, 3, 5 years, right? And so, data sharing needed to take on a much larger context, and it wasn't as easy as you would think, especially from a cultural perspective. At NOAA Fisheries, it was a little bit easier because the systems were somewhat, no, I wouldn't say integrated, but they were all kind of in the same room, if you will, on different servers, but physically co-located. Back then we didn't have the cloud, so they were all kind of in the closet in the server room back there. And so if you knew the IT people, you can figure out how to get access to the data, and it was a little bit easier process, even though there were still some data ownership issues. But you know, it wasn't as competitive as it was at the university. And then fast forward over to the Federal Transit Administration, which is not a scientific research organization. It was more of a granting authority that had oversight over a variety of different transit operations. They managed, well, I managed, but through them, obviously, their entire data infrastructure. So I had access to everything that I wanted. And in my other collaborative roles with other folks within DOT, in other administrations within DOT, there was data sharing and data governance discussions and things of that nature that kind of led into some of the larger contextual governance issues that we deal with now on a regular basis. And then at the state, it is even higher level still, because now at the state level, not only do I work with the governor and I work with his cabinet secretaries and I work with executives at the different agencies, but I also work with delegates and senators, you know, and in the legislative body, to give them access to a lot of the insights they need to be able to do their jobs better. And so it's being able to create an environment where, you know, we're all working together and generating, you know, insights for the sake of the people that we govern. And I think that's critical, being able to do that. And it pretty much ties it all in together.
That is outstanding. And so share with us some of the initiatives that you've been working on while at Virginia as the Chief Data Officer. How's the journey been so far, and what type of projects and initiatives can you share?
Sure. So let me start with the projects and initiatives, because that's pretty easy. First and foremost, data governance, right? Create a data governance framework that builds in participation and engagement across the entire organization, not just horizontally, but also vertically, right? Being able to engage data custodians, data stewards, data owners, executive leaders, as well as state leaders, right? Because within the state government, not only do you have executive leaders that run the agencies, but you also have state leadership. You have the governor, you have delegates, you have senators, right? You have a variety of folks across multiple branches of government that are engaged in the leadership of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So being able to engage them in the governance framework discussion was absolutely critical. And so that's why we came up with the data governance framework that we did, which has a data governance council that governs the data trust, and we can get into the data trust later. We also have the executive data board that engages the executives in the overall discussion of how to implement and allocate the appropriate resources to govern the data trust, but as well as a Virginia Data Commission that brings in state leaders from across the different branches of government to have conversations about what are our overarching goals, what are the things that we want to accomplish at the large macro scale from within the Commonwealth, and then how do we translate those into individual agency performance targets that each agency can hit. Because obviously when you talk about being able to, I'll give you an example. So for example, 10% reduction in overdose deaths, right? Yeah. That's a metric that we can get from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. They can provide us those metrics on a day-to-day basis. What are the causes of death and how many people died from those causes? That's great. But if I were to turn to the Chief Medical Examiner now and say, hey, okay, well, I want you to reduce that number. They can't, right? Their business processes, unless they fudge the numbers, you know, their business processes aren't geared, like that's not what their mission is, right? Their mission is to do something very differently and report on those numbers. But there are other organizations within state government that do have an impact on that number. And so, you know, we have like the Department of Social Services, Department of Criminal Justice Service, the Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Medical Assistance Services, Department of Behavioral Health and Development. These are all different agencies that have a role to play in being able to have an impact on that reduction in overdose deaths. And so being able to take that overarching goal and say, okay, now how do we translate that to something that the social services folks can work on, looking at their business processes and how do they either redevelop or transform or, you know, integrate their data in such a way that will give us some more insight as to what can they do to have an impact. And then look at that from all the different agencies combined, bring those assets together, run the analytics on it, generate the insights, and then be able to spit that back from an operational context to support operational, tactical, and strategic decision-making across all those different levels. So that's the governance component of what I've been working on. In addition to that, I've also been working on the data trust component and data discovery, right? Because, you know, you can't use data you don't know exists. So, you know, the data discovery aspect of it is establishing an enterprise data catalog and a process by which agencies can upload their metadata into a common enterprise data catalog environment that is then leveraged to create a publicly accessible metadata catalog that then other organizations can use to identify what data assets they would like to get access to.
Yes.
And therein lies the data trust. And so creating a legal framework for establishing the connection between, being the office of the CDO as a conduit for data assets coming from restricted data assets. So not open data. Open data is a whole other animal, and we're dealing with that, but restricted use data, right? Data assets that aren't necessarily open. We can't just share with everyone for a variety of reasons, as you know.
Yes.
Creating the technology platform and the process and the legal framework to help agencies make an easier decision about what data assets can they share. So instead of agencies creating point-to-point data sharing agreements with every single entity that wants access to their data, they simply have an agreement with me as the trustee to then facilitate and negotiate and broker that transaction. So as organizations come into the data trust and want to have access, when that platform is called Data Sage, our secure analytics and governance environment. Acronyms are real big in the government,
That's
so
great,
we have to make sure we do our good work and we create awesome acronyms. So organizations come into Data Sage, they can look at the different metadata that's available and then be able to submit a formal request for those data assets. So not just is the legal framework there, but the technology implementation is there to help support that legal framework. And then lastly is data talent development, working with our universities and a variety of organizations, not just in our Commonwealth Data Internship Program, which it's almost like matchmaking for data analytics, right? Where we have agencies that have data and problems they want to solve, and then you have universities with students and skill sets they want to use, and just bring them together so they can work, right? And create data analytics and intelligence projects for the agencies at little to no cost, right? It creates a lot of value for both parties. But in addition to that, we also have the Rural IT Apprenticeship Program, which is a program for our rural communities to get them engaged in the digital economy. So start building up some data acumen and data technology skills within our rural communities to start bringing up the talent in those communities to start leveraging data as an asset, right? First off, doing data documentation work. And that's how you get into the program, right? You start your apprenticeship doing data documentation using the process that we created, the tools that we have, so there's no cost to the organization itself, other than the salary of that individual, which is covered by the grant program. And essentially what that does is that allows that apprentice to not just learn about data and metadata and understanding the business processes that generate the data, but also government, right? How the operations of government and how does the government operations create those data assets that they're documenting, right? So they're getting two experiences in one from a very data oriented perspective and the other one more from a business perspective. How does the government function? And so with that domain expertise, that puts them in a much better position to understand what they're working on and how to apply that into other cyber fields, like either cybersecurity or application development or data analytics, machine learning, right? They now have an appreciation for the domain that they're working in. And so that's one of the biggest things that I'm really excited about.
Oh man, for sure. And that is such a broad scope of work that you're doing. And man, it's impressive. It's like it's kind of like the equivalent of running maybe like 4 or 5 different data companies within the government, servicing other government agencies. Just the data sharing on its own, there's whole businesses that do just that.
Just that. Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I know. I mean, there are whole businesses that do just data cataloging. There are whole businesses that do just data warehousing or data integration. This is for the past 23 months now. This is what I've been working on, and I call it my herding cats initiative, right? Because each one of these things are a bunch of little kitties, right? And they're all running around wanting to do their own thing, and you're kind of corralling them and herding them towards the same direction, not always at the same speed, but they're kind of moving there with the hope that when they all converge, everything is in place and you can start moving forward. And that's where we are right now. We are at the point of convergence with all of the little cats.
Oh man, that is yeah, spot. Like I can only imagine that is spot on, and exactly what I wanted to ask you about, and how to get people involved and interested. But first I wanted to ask you, how do you pick the tasks that will be prioritized, or the data assets to start working on first? How does that happen? Is it from the agency? Is it in conversations with other areas? Is it decided at a state level? What's the process there for something to become an area of focus?
So that's very great question, and I think one of the primary things is in the legislation that created my position, there was also the mandate to work on an opioid pilot project, and so that was one of the first things, like get on board, and the first day I got to the job, work on the opioid pilot project, and thankfully I had technology partners and agency partners that were already starting to have those discussions and starting to get together on that to be able to just jump on that project and run with it. But since then, obviously, COVID-19 has been a significant project that we've been dealing with. So it's having conversations with state leaders across the board to identify, what are the things that we're most impressed upon, right? What are the things that we absolutely have to start dealing with? These large-scale, multidisciplinary, complex problems that aren't very straightforward, that are not easy to deal with. Those are the ones that kind of drive the discussion. And then through that process, grow organically, identify what other data elements and assets we can bring to the table to start, like I said before, painting that larger picture of what's happening in the world, and how do we learn better about how to respond to these large scale issues.
Exactly, and what really stood out to me is the similarities with working in a large organization, where you might have a metric that the organization wants to improve, and some people have the data, other people have the capabilities to be able to impact that metric, and that the data function sits kind of like in between as this broker, as somebody who incentivizes, as somebody who brings people together, and in such distributed, complex environments, tackling such complex issues as well. It's a big task. Like, it's a tall order. Yeah, right.
It's huge.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah, herding the cats. How do you approach the I guess the herding of the cats? Do you have any tips for people that are in those situations? I find that a lot of people, even myself, like, I find that I don't give that enough time and enough focus in my day, but it's really such a huge level of impact for the work. So do you have any tips for people that should be spending more time on it, or that could be doing a better job?
I do, but it's not a recipe, right? Like, none of this stuff you can write an instruction guide and say this is a step-by-step playbook of how you need to do this, because every organization is different. Every organization has a different culture, and culture plays a key role in how willing they are to share data, to do data analytics, to believe the intelligence that you're putting in front of them, and then to act upon it, right? So all of those things are really, really, really dependent upon culture. And so the first thing you need to do as you come into these situations is really feel out the organization, get a really good understanding, ground truth yourself in how that organization operates. What is its primary culture? Are there any trust issues? What are the relationships within that organization that you need to cultivate to help build up that trust? Because at the end of the day, it's about respect and trust, right? Yeah. If individuals don't have respect and trust for each other, then a relationship does not ensue, right? And so those are the primary components of being able to bring people together, is to cultivate that respect and trust. And obviously that comes with integrity, right? I mean, you have to have integrity. And we talk about personal integrity, but that leads to data integrity, right? Making sure that the data assets are fit for purpose, and and data quality and all that stuff. But you can't get there until you have personal integrity and being able to build those relationships. So ultimately, feeling out the culture, getting a really good handle on what are the relationships that currently exist that you need to participate in to get a better understanding of the role you as an individual can play as a facilitator and a catalyst, right? And I think that's critical, because you are not necessarily the doer of all things. You are the catalyst of these things getting done, and putting yourself in making sure that you're in that mindset of understanding that it is not 100% up to you. you can only herd the cats, but you can't make the cats do anything, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of just nudge them in different ways, but you really have to play the role of a catalyst and a facilitator. So being able to have that understanding is critical. And then obviously, you have to look at the big picture, right? And understand what are the driving forces behind that organization. They may list a particular attribute as a KPI, but is it really indicative of the customer's experience? Is it really indicative of success for that organization? And sometimes you have to question those things and be able to bring in alternative KPIs to be able to say, well, you think this is really measuring this, but in reality, it's measuring that. And this is what you're after. But that means that you have to understand the business.
Yeah.
Right? You have to dig deep and be able to truly understand the business itself. You are not a technologist. You use technology, but as a data officer, you are not a technologist. You are a business person who leverages technology to make the business more successful in whatever it is that business is. So I often tell folks that, data is a business asset, not a technology asset. It's implemented in technology, but the value proposition for data is in the business world. And that's where you as a CDO need to really play, is that role between business and technology, and help facilitate that conversation and help catalyze the right actions that need to take place to move that organization forward.
Man, I love that consultative approach of, you really kind of like need to get under the hood of what business outcome people are trying to get, and understand that, and then help them define the best metric to guide them there, define the type of data that they need. So you're really, as you said, you really are a business partner that has a data capability, but kind of like a business partner first. Is that how you see it?
Oh, absolutely. You are definitely a business partner. You're there to make sure the success of the business is, or the organization, let's say,
Yes.
to make it more generic. Because all organizations have different success metrics, and being able to understand what drives that organization is critical to you being successful in this role. And oftentimes that sometimes means business process reengineering, right? Sometimes you need to dig deep and see what they're doing up and down the chain that either generates poor quality data or missing data, or they're not collecting the data at all, which then impedes their ability to make decisions later on down the road. So you have to be willing to understand the business and dig deep into the nitty-gritty details of how that business operates. What are the business processes that they're currently using across the broad spectrum of units and organizations within that business, to get a better understanding of how it all comes together. And sometimes you actually have to recommend, you really need to do this differently. Well, we've always done it this way. Yeah. But
about that.
this is where you are now, because you've always done it this way. And if you want to do something different, or you want to get somewhere different, you need to do something different. And so being able to persuade those business managers to think a little differently and operate a little differently. And it is painful. I mean, business process reengineering is not an easy process. And it's something that, requires a lot of pain and sometimes suffering. And so, being able to explain to them and articulate the value of the change in the process and how they're going to get more out of it is key. You have to be able to do that. And you have to do that from a business perspective, not a technology perspective. Nobody cares about the bells and whistles that you're going to bring into the company. They want to know what you're producing for them. And that's where you need to focus.
Oh, so true. So true. And also I can see that's another area where the trust and respect that you focus on building, really pays off when you are needing to influence somebody in that way, to see something new, to move from where they are to somewhere new. I can see how you put the pieces together. So to smooth out that process and really be, on the stakeholder side and helping them as this, organizational ally, really. Man, it is impressive. And tell me, what is the the structure of your team, and what were or what do you think a CDO function or the team of a CDO function should look like? What are the main areas of responsibilities, and sort of key functions in there?
So I'll go to the first off with the main areas of responsibility. So, my mission statement is very simple. It's increasing the value of our data assets over time, right? And how do you increase that value? And I go back to that data value chain, right? Where we talk about data to knowledge, or data to information, to knowledge, to intelligence, right? And being able to do that effectively in the organization. And there's a variety of different processes that you have to implement to be able to do that. But more important than that is, putting additional eyeballs on those data assets. So the more you share your data, the more different, the more individuals are able to put their own perspectives and generate their own information, their own knowledge, their own intelligence. And so being able to do that effectively is one of the main drivers behind my position. And that's why I really focus a lot on that data value chain, because it really kind of guides how to do the things that I need to do. As far as my team is concerned, it's pretty funny because when I first came on board, I had zero funding, zero team, right? Which,
wow.
Which for a lot of people, it's very daunting, right? It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
What do you mean? I have nothing? I have nothing. It's like, you have nothing. It's just you and the shoes that you brought in. And and so I was asked early on, like, don't you think that's a constraint? Don't you think that, you need things? I'm like, well, you can look at it that way, but it also is very liberating because,
Yes.
what can they say no to, right? It's just you by yourself and you're going out doing things. So, it's very hard to say no for just, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just running around doing stuff and building relationships. And so for the first year, it's kind of laying the groundwork, building those relationships, doing the road shows and the face-to-face and the handshaking, which is obviously very difficult to do now because of COVID-19 and all that stuff. But that was pretty much a lot of the work that now obviously in the back of my head, I already knew, like, these are the things that I wanted to get done: data discovery, building out data trust, all that stuff they are milestones of things that you need to have in place to implement the value chain, but they aren't set in stone. Like the technologies that you use them, they're not set in stone. It's whatever you have available. Who are the people engaged? You don't know because you're brand new to the organization, so you got to figure that out. So that's why, that listening tour, if you will, of understanding how the culture operates and the organization operates was critical. But then as the process evolved, and I also had, in that same legislation that mandated my position, I also had a mandate to stand up a data sharing and analytics advisory committee. Now, this was a committee with 3 delegates, 2 senators, 4 cabinet secretaries, and a bunch of other people. And I like to say, in a partridge in a pear tree, because everybody is like the kitchen sink. Everybody was thrown in there. But this was my sounding board, right? These were the individuals that I would engage with to have conversations monthly about what am I doing? How am I moving it forward? What are our plans, right? And at the end of all this, generate a report that we provided to the General Assembly and the governor on what the permanent governance framework should be. So it's a, stakeholder engagement, listening tour, getting everyone in the same space to work. And so that was pretty much the main focus of my first year. And that ultimately facilitated getting a little bit of funding. So I got $752,000, which is not a big amount of money, but it was enough to get me started and hire some contract teams to do some of the technical implementations that needed to get done to move the ball forward. Because, obviously we said it's implemented in technology. So there's got to be some technology implementation somewhere. It just depends on, what it is you need. So then as a result of that, not only did I have project teams and I was the project manager and the CDO and all this other stuff, but in January I had last summer I brought on a student. So I'm really big on student labor. And so I work really well with students and they always have fantastic ideas and a lot of energy. So I'm happy to give students opportunities to work and mentorship and participating. So we had a student and he worked all summer and helped me build up a lot of things that I needed to build up and get me ready for the report and all that stuff, which is fantastic. And then we brought on the project team. So I had 3 different project teams working on 3 different components of the entire thing, but none of them controlled the entire thing. I controlled the entire thing, right? So I only had the keys to the entire kingdom. Everyone had the key to their room, you know? And so, being able to work with them on that. So I had help there. And then In March, I brought on a communications outreach and engagement manager, which has really been extremely helpful in getting the word out, right? Because
such a good idea.
I don't talk about myself. I hate talking about myself. Like, you ask me, what it's really funny. Like, every time I have an accomplishment review, it's like, I know I did stuff, but whatever. I mean, I don't look in the rearview mirror. I'm looking forward. I've got things I'm doing. This is what I'm working on now. Don't ask me what I did last month. That's all. It's a blur right now. And so she's been extremely critical in being able to get the word out and really show people, like, these are all the things we've got going on, and this is what's happening, and this is how you can engage. Because as I said earlier, engagement and participation are critical to the success of this program. And so having that person be able to run with that has been awesome. And then just recently, I brought on a deputy chief data officer to help me with my operations, because as all these cats are running around, you can't herd them all by yourself. So you need someone to take that on as a full-time job. And so that's one of the things but I also have what I'm calling my program team in the works, right? So I have, a data privacy officer, I have a security analyst, I have, these are all things that I would like to have at some point, but they're not in the cards right now because, we're too small and we're still growing and trying to figure things out. But, I have an org chart that I put together that has all these things, has a program coordinator because, all these things need to be coordinated and schedules need to be maintained and all that wonderful stuff. Data architects, data engineers, technical project manager, a BI specialist, a data analytics specialist, a data scientist, obviously, right? A data analytics, project manager, because a technical project manager is very different from a data analytics project manager, right? They work in different realms, and you can't just take someone with a PMP and throw them on a data analytics project and expect them to be successful, right? It's not going to work. They may know the ins and outs of project management, but data analytics and business intelligence and machine learning are a completely different animal, and you really have to understand that world to be able to manage that world effectively. So those are kind of like the spots that I've allocated for myself to put together, with obviously the availability of funding as we grow. But yeah, that's pretty much the team that I've kind of recipe together for myself.
It's fantastic, man. It is. It's. I really feel like you are going about things in the right way. I'm sure it feels like it's the hard way, but sometimes sometimes the hard way and the right way are the same way.
Well, for me, it's my normal way. Like, this is always the way, right? It's just the hard work. You got to do the work, right? Nothing good ever comes easy, right? You have to put in the hard work, but it's fulfilling. I mean, it's what I said at the beginning, right? It's fulfilling work. It's something that I love doing. That always, like, my entire career has been joyful because of the passion that I have for this work. And I think, being able to do it and not feel, I mean, it's like my professor friend said, it's not work, because you love it. So, it's hard work because you gotta put effort into it, and you gotta stay focused, and you gotta work at it. But at the end of the day, there are many, many, many worse jobs that I could be doing, and I love the fact that I'm doing this one.
Oh man, and it shows. It really, really shows, man. It's impressive. Cool. That's amazing. I know that we are almost out of time. I do have one last question for you. I want to ask you about, with everything that you've done in your career so far, what are you most proud of that you've achieved?
Wow. I mean, I have quite a few students that have risen to levels of prominence in their respective fields. And that to me means more than anything, to be honest with you, is to be that catalyst for raising people up to reach their highest potentials. And that to me is the most important thing, right? Is being able to empower people to reach their potential. And I'll tell you a funny story. So at FTA, when I was engaging the business unit in the business intelligence initiatives that I was doing, right? So I started putting together the data lineage and putting together the data pipeline and all the pipes and infrastructure necessary to be able to do appropriate data intelligence. When I got to a point where I was ready to start talking to the business units and say, okay, you know, how can I help you? These are the capabilities that we're bringing to the table. What are your most pressing problems? What are the things that you're trying to deal with that you don't truly understand, that I can bring some intelligence and some insights to help you? And one of them, and I interviewed a few people because there were different business units across the organization. So there were multiple veins to work through. And one of the individuals, I'll never forget it because it hit me like a ton of bricks that in that interview was like, why am I here? You know, like,
Yeah,
you're wasting my time. I have things to do.
yeah.
Why am I here? And I left that meeting like, wow, that was pretty bold, right? But yet, fast forward 12 months later, after I've built up all of these different dashboards and visualizations and reports and really enabled him to see his operations and look at inefficiencies and be able to make adjustments, that person decided that they wanted to become a data scientist. Isn't that awesome? Like, that to me is like, it blew my mind when I heard. And I didn't like, it was after I left the organization that I then found out that, you know, he wanted to be, he essentially changed to a whole other unit, got training, and is now at a university doing, you know, learning how to be a data scientist. And I was like, wow, like that to me is a huge success. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about culture, you're talking about really changing individual behavior, right? Because that's what culture is. It's just the aggregation of individual behaviors working together in an organization. So if I was able, through the work that we did, change this one individual who at our first meeting was like, why is this important to me? Like, why am I even here? Why are you bothering me with this? I have things to do. To then realize the value and want to personally invest in themselves in training to take on this new career. I mean, dude, that was like, whoa, okay. That
was in 12 months. The
yes,
180 degree.
That was in 12 months. In 12 months, that individual transitioned, and I was like, wow, that's
incredible.
Cool. That is cool. That is cool. So, you know, I mean, I'm not saying that was my accomplishment by itself, because we, you know, have a team and we all work together and we build out the stuff. But seeing that transformation in an individual, you know, and I can tell you that, you know, just that comment itself, like, why am I here? Why are you bothering me with this? Really kind of gives you a little bit of perspective as to how he was feeling in that position at that time, right? Where he felt like, I'm just cranking widgets, man. I'm just cranking widgets. And you know what? Just let me go back to cranking my widgets, because really there's nothing else, right? And to be able to give that person enough hope and capability to be able to transition to something better, that maybe, you know, I haven't talked to him since, so I don't know how he's feeling right now, but I would hope that maybe this might be the career that brings him that light, that spark, that passion, that, you know, gets him out of the cranking widgets and really, you know, gives them purpose and enjoyment and fulfillment. I mean, what better can you ask for, you know? So that to me is huge.
That's incredible, cool. Man. That is incredible. And that is a fantastic note to end on. Carlos, thank you. Thank you so much, man. This is pleasure. Amazing. This has been amazing. Yeah, obviously this we are releasing the video at the moment, but we're gonna release the audio in the podcast, and I'll be in touch when that happens. And man, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing all your lessons, your insights. It's been a blast.
My pleasure, Felipe. Always. You know,
take care. Please stay in touch.
Whenever.
Stay safe, man.
You too, man. You too.
Talk to you soon. Have a good one.
All right. Enjoy your day now.
Have a good evening. Thanks, man.
Thank you. All right. Bye.